Alright, hey everyone, welcome to this tutorial video. We're going to be teaching you how to do dialogue in the GECK. I'll try and run all of you guys through the very basics to get everything set up in the way that we should. I'm going to try and make this as quick and snappy as possible, so let's get right into it. Once you have the GECK downloaded, and if you need help downloading it and getting it set up, please talk to me or please talk to anyone else who has done that before. We're going to go over to File, we're going to go to Data, and we're going to start a new ESP. Now, unless you have an ESP already that you're working on or that you have been asked to work on, all you need to do to start a new ESP, especially if you have GECK Extender as you should, double click on Frontier ESM, click OK. Now you won't get this pop-up, that's fine. It will then load the Frontier and all of the required masters, which will allow you to start working straight away and very efficiently. Now, at the time of the recording this, we are working on a faster method for doing dialogue implementation that will include a special exe or a special plugin that you will need to use to help speed up the dialogue interface. I'm not using that currently because it has some work in progress bugs in it, but we're going to get started anyway. So, for anyone who has not used the GECK window before, there are three main windows. It's the object window, the cell view window, and the render window, as well as the tab up here. For the purpose of dialogue implementation, the only thing we need to be focusing on is the object window. So we're going to go to the object window. At the very top, you'll see actor data, quest, and here is a list of all the quests. Now think of quests as basically just containers that hold whatever you need them to hold. In our case, we're going to be holding dialogue. So it's really easy. Right click, click new, and you'll have this pop up. Now it looks confusing and daunting and terrifying, but let's start really simple. ID. Give it an ID that makes sense. For the Frontier, all objects need to be prefixed, which means put before whatever you're going to add. So we're going to go TF, which is the Frontier. This will help us keep things organized and make sure that nothing gets lost. So we're going to do TF test dialogue. Really simple, really easy. At this point, you're going to want to click OK. That will just save out your quest and make sure that it's set up and ready to go. Now you'll say, oh, where's my quest gone? Because it's sorted by alphabetical order, we're just going to scroll down using the scroll wheel, of course. TF test dialogue. First thing you're going to want to do when you start this, unless you have been specifically told otherwise, click the button, the checkbox that says Start Game Enabled. What this will allow it to do is allow for this dialogue and this quest to work immediately when we get in game. If you don't have that enabled, there are certain instances where you don't want it enabled, where you want dialogue to only happen at a certain point in the quest or at a certain point something, but for the most part we're going to be having that kept on. Now priority is basically a way of checking what is more important to play. So if you have two, say for example, greetings that are supposed to play, say one is hello, the other is hi, if you want the hi to say happen more often, you would have a higher number. If you want the hello to happen more often, you'd have that be a higher number. Now this works on a per quest level or a per dialogue level, and we'll get into what all that means in a second. Let's get started. The first and most important section you'll want to be checking out is the topics window. Now this all looks really, really complicated. I can assure you it's a lot less intimidating than it seems. Think of dialogue as a series of containers. That's a really good way to think of a lot of things in the GECK, to be completely honest. Topics are just containers for dialogue. Now, for this game, topics can hold multiple pieces of dialogue, and each of those pieces of dialogue can have multiple lines in it. Because each piece of dialogue can only technically hold one response, you can have multiple responses in each dialogue. So we're going to go right click in the little section on the left here, add topic. Now you'll see a big old list of topics here. What you're going to want to do is, assuming that you've already written the dialogue or you're starting to write it, I would just use whatever topic name you came up with. So let's go TF test dialogue topic 1. Great, and that'll take a sec. And you now have your dialogue added to your quest. Great, now what do you do now? We're going to go over to here where it says info. This is where you actually start adding your piece of dialogue. So let's go right click in this little section here, new. Now this will take a sec. This is a part we are looking at speeding up quite significantly because it is currently extraordinarily slow. This is going to open up a window. This is a new response window. This is where you actually add the dialogue that you were writing. And remember, each response of dialogue can only have 150 characters max. That includes punctuation and spaces. So make sure that you're taking that into account when you're writing your dialogue, or if you are writing this directly into the GEC without any sort of spreadsheets or anything like that, then you get a very handy little counter up the top here that lets you know how much you're writing. So let's just write something simple. Great. So we've got our response text, and we have used 53 characters. We're going to add a full stop as well. Now, for the rest of this response window, you can ignore most things here. This is all a little bit more complicated. Something I would strongly suggest that you try and use as much as you can. Down here where it says emotion type in the audio section, you can choose what emotion that line should show. And what this will change is it will change the facial animation on the NPC. So you can have a piece of dialogue, obviously this guy's happy, so we're going to have the emotion type as happy. Really easy, really simple, don't overthink it, just whatever comes to your head as the most sensible. Idle animations up here will show in a later video, but that's a way to add animations to whatever NPC is speaking to the player. Great, so we've got our piece of dialogue. Now what? We might have our dialogue, but we still need something for the player to respond to that piece of dialogue with. This is where the prompt comes in. So it always goes prompt and response, except with a few specific cases, and I'll explain those in a minute. But we're going to start off by just typing in a really basic prompt rather. We only have 100 characters to do so. There are ways to get around that limit, but we won't be looking at that right now. So I'm going to ask, what is your name? Really easy, really simple. And now that is, for all intents and purposes, a mostly complete line of dialogue. Now, of course, there's a few other things here that we need to look at. So we're going to look at conditions first. This is really important. Each of these topics and each of these pieces of dialogue need to be conditioned. What that means is conditioning it so that it only plays when that specific NPC is talking. Otherwise, you can end up having NPCs that aren't your character talking those lines of dialogue, and we don't want that, obviously. So we're going to go right click in the condition section, click new, and it will bring up a condition item window. Now, for the most part, you can ignore everything here except where it says function parameters invalid. We're going to click that, left click, and it will bring up a window that is a list of NPCs. Now, because we haven't made any particular list at the moment, we're just going to choose 188 Alexander. Now, to explain what this is doing, this is conditioning this piece of dialogue to check, is the ID of the current subject, which is whatever NPC is saying that dialogue, equal to 188 Alexander? And does that equal 1? So, is this NPC 188 Alexander? If it is, it'll be allowed to play. That's the basis of setting up a singular piece of dialogue, in a sense. There's also a number of buttons, a number of extra sections here that we'll look at. But first off, we're going to introduce the concept of a greeting. A greeting is a piece of dialogue that plays when the player will first speak to or interact with an NPC. So we're going to go add topic, and instead of creating a new topic, we're going to type greeting. And remember, on any Windows program, you can start typing whatever topic or whatever piece of text it is, and you'll be brought to it. So I just typed greeting, and I have the greeting. You do not need to create a new greeting topic for every single quest. It is a vanilla and hard-coded topic that will play when your NPC is spoken to. So we're going to add a piece of dialogue here. Great. So we've added our greeting. This is what the NPC will say to the player the first time that they talk to them. Say, hi there, player. Now, because this is a piece of dialogue that is not a response to the player, it does not need a prompt. It is just a piece of dialogue that the NPC says to the player to get the conversation started. Now, what happens next? How do we set this chain of events up so that the NPC will actually start talking about what we want them to talk about? Really easy. Make sure that our thing is conditioned, and we're going to condition it to 188 Alexander as we did before. This is where the choices, add topic, and link from sections come through. Now, we only, for the most part, need to be considering the choices. Think of choices as the pieces of dialogue that will be shown up when you talk to an NPC in-game. So if you're talking to Chet or to any other character in the game, it'll have a list of choices for the player to choose from. So maybe some questions, maybe a goodbye, maybe a shopping one. So we've already got a topic set up here. Really easy. So what we're going to do is going to go back to our greeting, and we're going to go right click, add topic. We're going to go down to our test topic, right click, left, and it is now there. So when the player presses E or whatever interaction key they have on that NPC, which is in our case 188 Alexander, he will say, hi there, player. After having said that line, the player will be presented with a list of choices. In our case, we only have one, so that will be the test dialogue topic 1. When the player selects that, they will be spoken to with the following response. Hello, I am Bob, and I am a piece of testing dialogue. What is your name will be the prompt that is shown up. Now, obviously, we maybe want Alexander / Bob to have a few more pieces of dialogue. That can be done by having more topics. Think of topics as a way to have important pieces of whatever you want to tell the player, but you can have multiple lines for each topic. So, what is your name? Hello, I am Bob, and I am a piece of testing dialogue. If you click right click and create new response, you can add as many responses as you feasibly need for this piece of topic. There we go. So to run down what we just did, we have added an extra response to our piece of dialogue. So when the player asks, what is your name? He will say, hello, I am Bob, and I am a piece of testing dialogue. He will then say, I am also talking in a second way here with an additional response. After that occurs, in our case, nothing will really happen and it will exit dialogue. The reason for that is that we don't have anything else for it to go to. So think of dialogue as a chain of events that needs to happen. The greeting will start that conversation / chain of events. We then need to make sure that we give the player a number of chains or links to continue going through the conversation. In our case, because we don't have any other chains and we don't have any other choices to go through, it will just end the piece of dialogue here. Obviously, this is not what we want because this is actually an error. This will throw an error in game and it will sort of just not function the way we want it to. If we want this to be the only piece of dialogue that the player can have with Bob/Alexander, we need to go down here where we have a number of checkboxes. For the most part, the only real checkboxes you need to consider are goodbye and say once. Goodbye will make it so that whenever that topic is played, the conversation will end between the player and the NPC. This is really handy for goodbye topics, and it's essential for goodbye topics, if we're being honest. And it will end the conversation there. So we can also add, for example, an extra piece of dialogue for a goodbye, as easy as that. Now, if we wanted the conversation to continue, say you have 4 pieces of dialogue, 4 topics that you wanted the player to be able to talk about. Past that greeting, you can also have that first test topic cycle back to itself. And so when the player finishes this conversation, he will then also see the option to talk about this again. So he'll be able to ask, what is your name again? However, as I'm sure anyone who's played Fallout will know, that will show up in grey because you've now already spoken about that conversation. If you have multiple choices here, it will allow you to cycle through them and select them however many times you want. Obviously, you need to be able to let the player exit the conversation at some point. So we would have, in our case, a goodbye topic. So we'll set up a goodbye and remove the choice. So the chain of events, the link would be, we talk to the NPC, he says, hi there player. The player choice is then to say, what is your name? Hello, I am Bob. I'm a piece of testing dialogue. I'm talking in a second way with an additional response. He will then end the conversation, and that's pretty much all you need to know for that. Whew, it is a lot. It is a lot to take in. But really, the easiest way to think about it is a chain, a conversation that you would normally have. So it's a call and response. So this is a call, the player responds, the NPC will then respond, and the player can call and response. It's a whole looping system, and it's pretty intuitive once you start really adding stuff in. Now, I mentioned earlier that you could also have multiple pieces of dialogue in a single topic. This is handy for when you, say, want to condition a skill check. So say we have a skill check topic as well. Let's add one here. Great, so we've added our second topic. We're going to add a new piece of dialogue here. Now, when you are writing speech or any sort of skill checks, you want to remember that the success or failed tag is not automatically applied to the dialogue you're writing. So you need to make sure that that is accounted for. So we'll write success. And great. We have our first piece of dialogue. We're going to add a second one as well. Again, right click and add. Great. So we've got 2 different responses depending on what the player's skill level is. Now, how do we set that up? So what we're going to do is we're going to add the prompt, just whatever it is. I'm thinking of this off the top of my head. Just like that, something really stupid, something really simple. Now, to condition this to actually function like a speech check, we're going to go down to where it says AV/perk. Now, there's a lot of things listed here, but think of it as three major sections: attributes, perks, and skills. Attributes are specials, so stuff like strength, perception, agility, all of those. We want dialogue, so we're going for speech, so that will be under skill. So we select that, and then we have to go down to conditions. Now, first of all, of course, we're going to condition our piece of dialogue to our NPC, which will be 188 Alexander. We also need to get actor value. Now, get actor value is, for anyone who hasn't played the game, is stuff like skill, survival, it's also health. In our case, we're going to be checking for speech. Now, we don't want to check the speech of the subject, because anytime a piece of dialogue is being run, the subject will be the NPC that is currently talking. We run a run on target. Target will be the player. If you don't feel comfortable doing that and you don't understand it, you can also choose reference. That will allow you to select a specific thing that you are checking. In our case, we'll click select where it says ref, scroll down until you find player ref. Because the player ref is always loaded at any point in the game, you don't have to worry about any sort of cell selection. Just click ref. Now this means that we will be checking the actor value of speech on the player. Now for the time being, it's only checking, is the actor value equal to 1? That's obviously not what we want, so we're going to change it to an operand. It can be less than or equals than. In our case, we want to be greater than. We're going to choose greater than or equal to. This is typically what you want, because if it's just like equals to or greater than, it doesn't really work. You know, if you're checking for, say, speech 50 and the player is speech 50, it actually won't function if you have it set to greater than. You need to set it to greater than or equal to. So let's go 50, and let's go back to target just for the sake of that. This will now check, is the player at speech level of 50 or over? So 50 and 51 will both work as such. Now we're going to right click on that condition, click copy all conditions. This is a really easy way to re-add the same sort of conditions, especially when you're doing stuff like lots of pieces of dialogue and lots of topics where you're all using the same NPC. We're going to right click on where it says conditions, and we're going to paste conditions. So you can see we have the get is ID and we have the actor value of speech. We're going to make sure that our AV/perk section is also set up here to speech. Now, because we don't want this to be checking for greater than or equal to 50, we want to be checking less than. Make sure you select less than and not less than or equals to, because otherwise it will conflict. So we're going to check less than, and now we have a perfectly set up speech check. Now, you can do this with just two topics rather. So you can have one topic for failed and one topic for success. However, it is significantly easier to have both pieces of dialogue in the same topic. That way it's really easy to keep track of them. The way the game will run through the pieces of dialogue is it goes top to bottom. So in our case, the success will run first as long as the target speech value, which is the player, because the player is the target, is greater than or equal to 50. If that is not correct, if that value does not ring true, it will go down the list to the next piece of dialogue, which is in our case the failed topic, which is checking for less than 50. That's the basis of setting up any sort of speech or perk check. Perk checks works the same way, except you would do, instead of get actor value, you would do has perk. And in there you would just be checking equals to 0 or equals to 1. That's really all you need to know to really get started. Other than that, make sure your quest data is, of course, always set to start game enabled. Priority is up here. And that's all you really need to know to get started. And of course, if you have any questions, please feel free to let me know. This is a very quick run through on how to do topics. Well, close to half an hour worth of running through, but it is significantly faster than a lot of other tutorials, and it should give you enough info to really get started. And of course, if you have any questions, feel free to talk to me. Thanks, guys, and good luck.